She was building her cabin, one log at a time. Cowboy watching was a widower longing for a family. The land was quiet in that early Wyoming winter. No birds, no distant cattle, just the sound of wind dragging across frostbitten grass. Pines stood tall like silent witnesses, and a naked plot of earth stretched out in the middle of nowhere, marked only by the slow rise of logs forming what could someday be a cabin. She moved like someone used to silence, sleeves rolled, fingers raw, boots heavy with mud and sawdust. Her name wasn't known yet, not to the man sitting up on the ridge, a weathered cowboy with a worn coat and older eyes. He came to check the fence line after last night's snow, but his horse had stopped on its own, drawn maybe by the rhythm of her hammer or the strange peace in how she worked alone. One log at a time, no blueprints, no help. She didn't see him. Or maybe she did and didn't care. Every time she bent to lift another beam, her breath came out in white, like smoke from something broken inside. And that's when he saw it. The little boy's jacket, half buried in the snow by the tree line. Tiny, red, and torn, like someone left in a rush. The man's heart slowed. He scanned the clearing again, eyes narrowing. No child, no sounds. Just her, building like her life depended on it. He gripped the saddle horn tighter. Something wasn't right. People don't build cabins in silence unless they're hiding, and no one loses a child's coat without losing more than that. The wind picked up. She paused, stood still, and looked toward the tree line. Not at him, but somewhere past him, like she knew ghosts had followed her here. And the cowboy, widowed 4 winters now, felt something stir in him that hadn't moved in years. Not pity, not love. Something quieter. Recognition. He came back the next morning, saddle creaking under him, a thermos of coffee tucked into his coat like an offering. She was already working. Same boots, same silence, stacking logs like she was racing something no one else could see. The red jacket was gone now, but the soil where it had lain was disturbed, pressed down like small hands had knelt there. He watched her face. Not young, but not old either. Worn not by years, but by surviving. There was a way her jaw stayed locked, like she couldn't let it unclench or something inside might fall out. He'd seen that look before. In the mirror, years ago, when the fever took his wife and his boy, within 3 weeks of each other. He remembered sitting at the edge of their empty bed, staring at her brush on the dresser, wondering how something could hold so much love one day, and so much nothing the next. He hadn't spoken to anyone outside town in over a year, and even there, words had dried up. But now, watching her lift beams with cracked hands and no gloves, he heard that old voice inside, the one that used to care, the one that used to ask, "What if it was you?" She looked up once, catching him there, and in that flicker of eye contact, he saw it. Not fear, not welcome, just exhaustion. Like she was too tired to ask for help, or worse. She'd asked before, and no one came. He turned his horse to leave. It would have been easier. He owed her nothing. He wasn't some savior. But his hands wouldn't move the reins. He sat there, jaw tight, the wind stinging his eyes. There was a child here, or had been. And there was a woman building walls around herself in the middle of nowhere. He thought of his own boy, the way he used to hum while brushing the mule's tail. If someone had found his family back then, would they have ridden away? He sighed, dismounted, and walked toward her, boots crunching frost. He didn't speak, just poured coffee into the old tin mug that lay near her tool bag and set it on a stump beside her. She didn't thank him. She didn't have to. He didn't leave. The sheriff's truck came slow up the ridge a week later, tires crunching gravel like it had no business disturbing the quiet. The cowboy stood outside her cabin frame, hands calloused from helping her stack logs, not asking questions. The sheriff leaned out, squinting. "You seen a woman passing through?" he asked, voice low like he already knew the answer. "Brown coat, Traveling with a kid. Been missing out of Montana since October. Husband filed a claim. The cowboy didn't blink. Haven't seen no one, he lied, eyes flat. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded and drove off, engine echoing off the trees. That night, she didn't work. Just sat on the unfinished porch, knees pulled in, the boy asleep inside the tent she never let him leave. He's not mine, she said, voice hoarse like rust on old chains. But he was gonna die if I left him. Then she told him about the man she used to live with, a traveling preacher who laid hands on the sick by day and broke ribs by night. The boy was his nephew, dumped like trash after his sister passed. When she tried to leave, they came after her. So she ran with the boy, changed her name, hid here. I figured if I built walls, maybe he'd believe we belonged here. Maybe I could fake something steady. Her hands trembled when she said it. The cowboy listened, unmoving. He didn't speak of his own loss, didn't speak of the nightmares that still woke him, calling out names no longer alive. But something changed that night. She let him hold the boy's jacket while she cooked, let him fix the busted beam without watching his every move. The danger wasn't gone. It was circling. 2 nights later, a truck was seen down by the old trailhead. No plates, parked too long. A man asking questions in town with a photograph folded in his coat pocket. The cowboy saddled his horse before dawn and rode to the hardware store, bought nails, a bolt action, and canned peaches. When he returned, she was digging a root cellar. They're coming, he said. She nodded once, didn't flinch. Then we'd dig faster. Time was closing in, and so were the men who wanted to take the boy back, not for love, but for silence. The cabin wasn't just shelter now. It was a last stand. The boy wouldn't speak. Not a word in 5 days. But he followed the cowboy like a shadow, small boots crunching in his tracks, hands tucked in that too big red jacket she'd mended with fishing line. One morning, while she split kindling, the cowboy took the boy behind the cabin where the sun barely touched the snow, laid the rifle down gently, and knelt beside it. No words, just movements. Slow, careful, steady. The boy watched, eyes wide, breath visible in the cold. The cowboy showed him how to hold it, how not to flinch. He let him pull the trigger once, empty, just to hear the click. Later that night, she cooked venison stew and let the boy stir it for the first time. Her hands never left the pot, but she let his fingers wrap around the wooden spoon. The cowboy patched the hole in the tent, then paused at the door, watching her. She had a scar behind her left ear, long, curved, old. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. The next morning she watched him as he tied a horseshoe, saw the faded tattoo on his wrist, a date no one ever celebrated. He caught her looking and gave the faintest nod, like saying yes, it was a grave too. One night the boy had a nightmare. He called out finally one word, "No." She ran to him. He clung to her neck like he might drown. The cowboy stayed in the doorway, silent, his fingers clenching the edge of the beam like he knew that sound. The next day, the 3 of them sat by the fire, and for the first time, she smiled. Barely, but enough to make the cowboy look away, like witnessing something sacred. They didn't talk about the men who were coming. They didn't talk about leaving. They built, ate in silence, took turns watching the ridge. She started letting him finish her sentences with just a look. He'd nod, then do the thing before she asked. There was a moment, just before the wind turned, where it almost felt like family. Not a loud one, not whole, but stitched together from broken pieces that somehow fit. And the boy, who once wouldn't speak, now hummed when he stacked firewood, a quiet tune. Familiar, like a melody the cowboy's son used to sing when riding home at dusk. They came at dusk, 2 trucks kicking up dust along the frozen trail, tires spinning slow like wolves stalking prey. The cowboy had been sitting on the porch, cleaning the rifle he hadn't fired in years. She was inside, washing the boy's hands with warm water and a gentleness only women who've known violence can give. When the engines cut, everything else stopped. Wind, birds, even the breath in the boy's lungs. The cowboy stood, calm, still, like the air around him thickened with purpose. The first man out wore a preacher's coat, black with gold stitching, but the way he spit chaw and kicked snow off his boots said more than any sermon could. 2 others followed, one with a badge, one with a scar down his neck, both armed. "We're here for the boy," the preacher said, voice slick with fake authority. "And the woman. She's stolen blood that ain't hers." The cowboy didn't answer, just stepped off the porch and cocked the rifle, not raised, just ready. "Ain't no theft here," he said quietly. "Just survival." The man with the badge stepped forward. "You obstructing legal custody?" "No," the cowboy said, eyes steady. "I'm obstructing evil." The preacher laughed. "You think you can stop this?" His hand reached inside his coat, not for a Bible, but for steel. That's when she stepped out, barefoot, eyes on fire. "You want me?" she said, voice sharp like cracked ice. "Fine, but he stays." The boy ran behind her, grabbed her leg. The cowboy lifted the rifle, not at the preacher, but at the ground between them. A warning. The scarred man raised his weapon in return. Standoff. Silence. One move from death. Then, a shout froze from the trees. A 4th man emerged, unexpected, holding a camera. "Got it all," he said. "Preacher's got warrants across state lines. That badge is fake. They're not here for custody. They're running." The cowboy turned. It was the store clerk from town, young, quiet, tech-savvy. He'd suspected something, had followed, filmed. "You'll hang for this," the preacher hissed. "You'll rot." The cowboy stepped closer. "Already did," he whispered. The preacher lunged, and the shot cracked across the ridge. Dust rose. Horses neighed. The scarred man dropped first. Not dead, but stopped. The preacher froze. The fake badge clattered on the ice. No one else moved. No one had to. The cowboy stood alone, rifle still warm, chest heaving. He didn't look back. He had made his choice. He had chosen them, even if it cost him everything. Snow began falling before the bodies stopped twitching. The preacher lay on the ground, alive but broken, his hand pinned under the weight of the lies he'd carried too long. The sheriff from town came an hour later, called by the clerk who'd risked more than he'd known. No cuffs were needed. The badge had rusted long ago. The preacher didn't speak, not a word, as they lifted him into the truck, face bleeding from gravel, eyes hollow with a kind of loss worse than defeat, exposure. The boy stood near the cabin, small fists buried in his jacket, staring at nothing. She knelt beside him, her fingers running through his hair, not soothing him, just reminding him she was real, and here. The cowboy sat on the porch again, rifle leaning against the post, hat in his lap. He watched the sheriff drive away, watched until the red taillights vanished into trees, then closed his eyes like maybe now, finally, he could breathe without bracing for a punch. No one said much that night. The stew burned. The boy slept curled against her ribs. She stared at the fire unter, till the logs collapsed inward. Outside, frost climbed the windows, but inside, something softer held. At dawn, she took a shovel and walked behind the cabin, where the ground was hard and the sky still pink. He followed her, no questions, no words, and helped her dig. It wasn't for a body, just the jacket. That red thing, stained and torn, a symbol of running, fear, and everything that chased them. They buried it deep, not for the boy, but for the girl she used to be, the one who thought pain was permanent. When they covered the last patch of dirt, she whispered, "It's done." Not for him, for herself. The cowboy didn't reply, just placed a flat stone on top, then stood beside her like a headstone didn't always need a name to matter. That night, no one locked the door. The boy slept with his arms flung wide, dreaming of nothing dark. She sat beside the cowboy on the porch, shoulders touching, eyes forward. as wolves howled somewhere far away. He lit a cigarette, took one drag, then put it out like even the burn of it was too much for this new quiet. Nothing needed to be said. They had survived, not just the night, but the history inside them. And survival, in its own quiet way, was sacred. Spring came slow that year, as if the land itself needed time to heal. Snow melted in patches, not all at once, leaving behind scars in the soil like reminders of what had happened here. The cabin stood taller now, finished with windows and a roof that didn't leak. Smoke rose from its chimney each morning, not frantic, just steady like a heart finally finding rhythm. The boy planted seeds out back, tomatoes and corn, digging with small fingers and stubborn joy. He talked now. Not much, but enough. "Look," he'd say, holding up worms like trophies, eyes lit with something no one could steal again. She baked bread once a week, never the same recipe, always enough to share. Sometimes she laughed short, breathy, like her lungs were still learning how to hold happiness. And the cowboy? He never left. Built a shed beside the barn, taught the boy to ride, fixed the porch swing, each without being asked. He didn't need thanks, didn't want change, just the sound of boots in dirt, the warmth of soup at dusk, and her face across the table. Tired, yes, but softer now. They never called it a family, never spoke of what they were. But one day she painted their initials into the wet concrete step out front, small, faded letters, side by side. No ceremony, no announcement, just a mark that said, "We stayed." Years later, folks passing through sometimes asked about the stone out back. "Just a memory," the cowboy would say. And that was enough. Some nights, when the wind blew just right and the fire crackled low, the three of them would sit on the porch in silence. No stories, no ghosts, just the sound of living. And if you listened close, real close, you might hear the boy humming that same tune again. The one that once belonged to someone long gone, now folded gently into a new home. And in that hush, where sorrow once lived, a different sound echoed. Not louder, just truer. Like the last breath of winter giving way to a quiet, hard-earned spring.